Welcome to everyone who has joined the session today. I can see rising numbers on the screen. We're up at 77, 78 participants already. My colleague Sophie is helping me from the marketing team on today's webinar. It is being recorded. You will get the slides deck and the recording link as well at the end. Thank you very much for joining the session. I'm quickly going to make a start, but I'm going to start by sharing my screen, obviously. And yeah. Today's webinar or lunch and learn session is about embedding sustainability into procurement. The session is about 40-45 minutes, and then later on you have a chance to ask me any questions. I can solve your queries in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. Couple of house rules, like I said, questions, I will answer them at the end. If you think of any question in the middle of the session, that's fine. Put in your questions in the Q&A section only, and then I'll read out each of your questions and help answer them at the end. We've got a feedback form at the end. Sophie will share the link in the function with you. Please give us your feedback so we can better ourselves. And yes, you will get a PDF copy of the slide deck. The agenda for today, so we'll set the scene in terms of defining what sustainability and sustainable procurement means, what it means for you as an organization. And then I will take you through the 4 main clauses of ISO 20400, starting with Clause 4, Fundamentals, Clause 5, Organizational Level Policy and Strategy, Clause 6, Enablers, that I fondly call Santa's Little Helpers, that will help you to embed sustainability into the procurement process. Last but not the least, Clause 7, the actual procurement process, which is PSM, Plan, Source, and Manage. As I cannot see you, it's Zoom webinar function. I will introduce myself. I am Melita De Silva, and I work for Supply Chain Sustainability School and Action Sustainability. I currently have 18 years experience in social value, sustainable procurement, and being a procurement professional as well. What are you going to get out of today? So we're going to start by looking at what sustainability and sustainable procurement actually means, the official definition. What's driving you to be more sustainable as an organization? What are your reasons for trying to be more sustainable? A little bit of a brief summary and outline of the standard for sustainable procurement, which is ISO 20400. It's the framework, it sets the scene, and you will understand at a very high level what are some of the tools you can use to go ahead and drive a sustainable procurement approach. Starting with section 3. When we think about sustainability, we think about the environment. As you know, COP26 is going on. It started yesterday. It's not something I need to tell you about. But the environmental sphere or the environmental pillar of sustainability is something that's easy to comprehend. We all get it. It entails things like pollution prevention, waste management, thinking about the environment, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, using less of non-renewable natural resource. It's the economic and the social spheres of pillars that we often forget about, or we think of as the softer side, and it's not really easy to understand. When you think about economic sustainability, you see the first word on the screen is profit. Profit is good, but when you think about profit, don't just think about yourself as an organization, but about the profitability of your supply chain as well. Fair payment, for example, is one of the aspects or the opportunities that comes under the economic pillar of sustainability. Cost savings, by wasting less, by using less resources, you automatically save on your budget as well. The social side of sustainability, when you think about education, you're here today, you're training yourself. So can you take your suppliers along on the journey? Can you give them a bit of training and education as well? Community engagement and investment, maybe employing local persons, dealing with the local community as well, small, medium, local enterprises from the boroughs or the geographical location that is affected by your organization or project. Equal opportunity, not just within your own organization, but within your suppliers and subcontractors as well. If you think about sustainability and you only concentrate on one sphere or one aspect within these 3, very, very quickly, your sustainable decisions can become very, very unsustainable. It's about thinking, what am I going to procure, and how each of the impacts within these spheres can be a risk or a potential opportunity, and thinking always the three pillars or triple bottom line in terms of sustainability. Official definition as per ISO 2400, procurement that has the most positive environmental, social, and economic impact. Emphasis on the word positive, you're being proactive rather than plan and source, award a contract. If something goes wrong on the asset within your organization or project, then you're being reactive. Then you're setting about to mitigate things and put things in place when an investigation happens on the project or the site. By proactively embedding sustainability into procurement, you're thinking forward, and God forbid you do not want adverse things to happen in your organization. A quick overview of the standard. It's a guidance standard. You do not have audits. You can get assessed against it. What do I mean by that? After an assessment, you will get a score or based on 0 to 5, which tells you about your sustainability maturity level, where you are as an organization. You do not get a nice, shiny, gold-plated certificate that you can hang on a wall. The standard itself gives you an understanding of what sustainable procurement is, what are the impacts, considerations, opportunities you need to look out for, things you need to work on in terms of your procurement activities, so your policy, your strategy at the organizational level and within the procurement process. And finally, last but not the least, how to practically implement sustainable procurement. The myth is that it applies only to large organizations, but that's not true. It applies to organizations regardless of your size, your geographical location, and your sector. One thing to take away from this is that sustainable procurement is all not down to the buying team, the category managers, and definitely not down to procurement. I think if your cameras were on, I would probably hear you all going, a big, large sigh. But everyone who feeds into the buying process, into the procurement process, budget holder, budget allocator, end user, the person who makes the request or the requisition, the contract managers, the construction managers, whoever they are in your organization, all of them need to think in terms of sustainability and write that into the scope, into the spec. QSs, contract managers, when you're managing the supplier performance, think about that at your end as well. So take the burden, procurement professionals, if you're on the call today, off your shoulders. ISO 2400 does not replace any legislation. It works in tandem with your current legislations, your PPN 06, for example, your public procurement notices, policies as relevant to your geographical location, and other ethical frameworks as well. Traditionally, and I say traditionally, I probably sound like a dinosaur, but about 5 or 6 years ago, it used to be very rules-based. I'm a prestigious client. I will tell you, Mr. or Mrs. Supplier, what to do, and you will do what I tell you to do. It used to be about one size fits all. I will ask you some sustainability questions, whether you're large or a small company, you should answer that or be able to answer that. I would conduct audits on you. It was all about audits, paper-heavy questionnaires, and very, very retrospective reporting. Sustainability was the last thing on our mind. God forbid something went wrong, then we think about mitigating it. Today, I think most organizations are coming to an understanding that we need to do something a bit more proactive. It is becoming a business benefit-driven approach, not just because of policy or government compliance, but because they are starting to realize SROI, social return on investment, which is not really obvious in month one, quarter one, year one of you investing or procuring a sustainable solution. It is a prioritized approach. You cannot manage all of your contracts, all of your suppliers, and flow down hundreds of sustainability questions to them. So prioritizing top 10 spend, top 20 spend, which is my largest spend, who are my riskiest suppliers, who do I actually need to speak to? Yes, audit your suppliers for things like quality, environment, health, safety, modern slavery, labor rights, human standards, but also educate them. You're not dictating to them. If you're training yourself, can we offer any training to a supply chain? One of the examples I'll give you is I used to use a lot of NEC contracts on large projects like High Speed 2 and Crossrail. And I found that my suppliers were not really aware of the contractual clauses within there, what did it actually mean. Giving them a bit of commercial training could also help them on that journey. Yes, they need to fill in questionnaires, PQQ, SQ, so supplier questionnaire or a pre-qualification, but manage that relationship. It's not like I've given you the paperwork, have you given me policy evidence? Speak to your suppliers in the process as early as possible, one step before tender, PQQ, before that early contractor, meet the buyer events as early as possible to set the scene for what your sustainability expectations are. Keep it real and as early as possible. Rather than retrospective reporting, you're now managing the performance in real time. It's never too late, never ever too late to start speaking to your suppliers about social value and sustainability. It is a myth that once the contract's awarded, you cannot ask of them. Yes, don't demand of them. Have those open conversations when you have performance reviews either every month or every quarter. And if they say they can meet some targets and KPIs in terms of social value and sustainability, then there is no harm in doing a contract addendum in collaboration with your supplier. Don't just slap them in the face with it. So having those open 360 conversations. Coming to the last line, sustainable supplier versus sustainable supply. And this is where most of us make a mistake. A sustainable supplier is one who might be doing a lot of sustainability initiatives in-house. So they may have recycled paper, for example, they may have solar panels on their roof of their offices, etc., etc. But if what they're supplying to you in the contract or the scope that's been awarded to them, if that's not sustainable, that's not that them being a sustainable supplier is basically of no use. So you want sustainable supply based on the scope that you've awarded to them as well. These were the 4 main clauses that I described about ISO 2400 standard. Everyone who comes on my webinars, my workshops, be it the 3-hour or the 8-hour ones, asks me, Mel, how do I embed sustainability into the procurement process? This last one is all that I care about and all that I want to know. And I said, just stop for a minute, because one step above that, you have got your little enablers or helpers that will help you to embed sustainability into the process. But for those enablers to come alive or be active, you need to have a robust policy and strategy at your organizational level and some fundamentals and understand why you're doing it. If you've got a fancy signed off policy, but if you don't have leadership support, it's going to be a very long, slow, painful, lonely journey for you down here at clause 7 in the procurement process. And also there will be a disconnect or a little mouse that's eaten a golden thread. Your organizational level policy says, we will be ethical, we will source responsibly, and the procurement policy says, I will chop down the rainforest and I want cheap and cheerful. So understanding what your high-level organizational goals are in terms of sustainability, that flows down into your procurement policy, into your tender documents, top to down and outwards towards the supply chain. You do not want any mice eating up that golden thread along the way. So understand before the process, think about your helpers. What is the organizational scene setting that's happened, and what are your drivers and the principles that you need to think about and keep in mind? Fundamentals, very important. Talk about managing the risks, but think about, can we at least start by identifying what are the risks brought on by the procurement activity and the supply chain who sit on my tender list, to whom I've awarded contracts, to whom I'm negotiating with currently. Before you manage, identify the risks, prioritize them. If the likelihood of it occurring is great and it's going to be disastrous, then yes, I cannot park it on the back burner. If the likelihood of something occurring is low, and if it happens, it might just be a paper cut, then yeah, I don't really need to bother about it right now. So identify, prioritize, and then only manage your risks. Due diligence, acknowledging that by procuring something in our procurement activities and the complexity of the supply chain, we can have some adverse effects, sustainability impacts on triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, and that we are setting about to mitigate those risks. So just acknowledging by our procurement activities, there are going to be some adverse impacts anyway. Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. As procurement professionals, we are very, very busy. We really don't have the time to focus our efforts on everything and anything. In the first stage, when I said manage the risks, identify what those are, prioritize, whether it's even top 10 spend is too much for you, top 5 suppliers, my largest contracts, my riskiest contracts, that's the one that I'm going to set as my priority for the next financial year. And that's what I'm going to focus my efforts on. Avoiding being complicit in wrongful acts. If you're aware of something unethical or unsustainable happening in your supply chain, and you do two things, you either keep quiet about it or you're hand in hand with it. When things blow out of proportion, you will be part of that investigation. So if you know of something unethical or unsustainable happening in the procurement and within the supply chain once things are awarded, either you do your whistleblowing policy, that's where you reach out to or speak to your line manager so that you're not part of that as well. And most importantly, by the very nature of the work that we carry out as procurement professionals, we have every opportunity in every day, week, month, financial year, decade, to speak to our external stakeholders, that is the suppliers, to influence their behavior in the realm of sustainability. So please do go and exercise that influence. These are just a couple of drivers that I've thrown up on the screen. It'll be very, very different based on the sector, the industry that you operate in as a procurement or commercial management professional. I'm just going to go around the circle and give you a few of the examples. The customer is king, responding to your customer expectations. We deal with a lot of fast food giants globally, and customers are demanding vegan or vegetarian things on the menu, or sustainably sourced eggs or chicken, for example. Cost is everyone's driver. Why not? You want to reduce costs, come within the budget. You want to manage your risk. You want to ensure supply chain security. Both with Brexit and COVID, we've got shortage of drivers, but we've also got shortage of material. I don't know what your lives may be as buyers and procurement professionals today, but I really feel sorry for you. Legislation is quite an important one. You have to be compliant with whatever policies, public procurement notices govern your sector or your industry. That could be your driver. Increasing investor confidence in your organization, increasing your ratings with maybe ratings agencies as well. Managing stakeholder expectations, whether they are internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. Attracting and getting more innovative and digitalized solutions, which are leaner, meaner, greener, and definitely more sustainable. Making sure your workers want to work with you. This is quite an interesting one, because these days, as staff, we make very, very conscious decisions about the image of the company that we are currently working for or that we want to work for. So attracting, motivating, and retaining that talent, especially if you want to be seen as that sustainable and ethical organization, your workers will be proud to work for you. Economic value creation, thinking about things like whole life costing in your bid evaluation, life cycle cost as well, not just the immediate purchase price of an asset. Personal leadership, you want to be seen as market leaders in your sector as opposed to your peers in terms of sustainability, and definitely want to be seen as an ethical organization. So you may have one or two of these drivers at the top of your CEO, MD's mind. It could be 4 or 5 of these, but depends on whichever industry you work in. It could be very, very different for you. These drivers, whatever they may be, is what helps shape your policy and strategy and your way forward in terms of your sustainability journey. Your sustainable procurement risks and opportunities follow on from those drivers. You want to attract more customers as compared to your competitors in that industry and sector. You definitely want to manage your risks. Sustainability risks can also bring along reputational damage. The last thing you want is for your name, your organization's name, to be dragged into the newspapers. You want to attract, retain, motivate your staff, increase workers' productivity. Like I said, be seen as an ethical organization, leader in the market in what you do, increasing your investor confidence, and you definitely do not want to be in breach of any licenses that you absolutely need to comply with. So these could also be some things to keep in mind. When you set about developing your policy and strategy, make sure you have support from the leadership right from the top. And by this, I don't just mean rubber stamping a policy. Anyone at the top can sign a policy, put it on a nice card, paper, print it out, gold frame, hang it on the wall somewhere. But what every organization needs is true leadership and support from the top. So walk the walk, talk the talk, give the message in every senior leadership team meeting, when you're doing debriefs, when you have your team days, your company team days, for example. It's all about VFL, visible, felt leadership. Anyone can sign a policy, but are you also giving the message to your staff as well? Once you've established your policy and strategy, you need to realize who's accountable for this and who's responsible. So you and me as procurement professionals, it's down to us to embed sustainability into procurement. Maybe the head of the procurement department and top management are accountable for that actually happening, putting whether it's monetary or people resources in place. The golden thread, so you start with what's your organizational level policy and strategy. Okay, we want to be net zero carbon by 2030 or 2050. We want to minimize waste going to landfill by 90%. Whatever it is at the organizational level, that needs to flow down to procurement policy and strategy, down into the ground, into your actual procurement process, your SQ, PQQ, your tender documents, into your contract, and up to down and down outwards towards your supply chain. I've seen a lot of organizations that have got brilliant policies on their external websites, their intranet page. It goes down into the procurement process and it stops because they've forgotten to embed it into the contract. And that is where all your effort goes to waste, because you haven't actually told the supply chain that the commitments that they made at bid stage, they actually need to perform on that. So all of the effort here is basically, gone to dust. It's zilch. It's not valid anymore. Someone actually asked me this question because we mostly do our pre-qualification and our SQ, our due diligence, also known as business assurance piece, just for our immediate tier one who we've awarded a contract to. And the gentleman on my course said, Mel, I don't know who sits beyond my tier one. Do I really need to know who my tier twos and tier threes are? And that's quite a scary, frightening scenario, because if you don't know who sits beyond your immediate awarded suppliers, there's a whole host of risk that sits behind that. You're only as strong as your weakest link. If you don't know if any elements of the contract you awarded has been sublet out to any other suppliers or subcontractors, you don't know their name, their registered office address, what work they're doing for you on behalf of your tier ones, that's quite a scary situation to be in. Asking your tier ones, have you sublet out any element of the work, which part of the scope, to what value, who to, where is that company based, which components, what does their supply chain look like? You're trying to mitigate the risk that's brought onto you by your supply chain. Managing the implementation of the policy. We can all write a policy and let it sit in our SharePoint, our shared folders, hanging on the wall somewhere for the next 50 years. All it's going to do is gather dust. It's going to become a very rusty and a dusty document. Think about when you've written a policy, it may not be valid in the next quarter or the next year, depending on what's happening in the market tomorrow, for example, or next week. Does that policy validate the objectives? The organization says it wants to be net zero by 2030, reduce waste or single-use plastics, conduct training for staff and suppliers. Is that written in the policy? Do you have SMART goals? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. I'll give you an example of a client that is quite hilarious, but they once wrote into the tender to the supplier. They had to answer the question, how will you heal the ozone layer? That is not smart at all. That is so woolly and fluffy. You do not expect your supply chain to heal the ozone layer. So the supplier wrote quite a hilarious response, which was not scored. And he said, if all the cows on the planet basically behave themselves, the ozone layer will heal itself. But you asked a stupid question, you're going to get a silly response. So keep it realistic. What it is are you trying to achieve? Decarbonization, net zero carbon, minimize plastics, for example. So keep your question very, very specific and very smart. Communicate your policy internally and externally. I deal with some consultancy clients who've got some brilliant policies, but the procurement department doesn't have sight of it. They've never seen it till today. How does the team know what they're working towards, how they fit into the bigger picture? So communicate your policy internally to all of your staff, especially procurement, externally to your supply chain as well, so they know what is expected of them. Endorse and sponsor, so yes, get it signed, but make sure there's a visible felt leadership piece as well from top management, and that they set clear roles and responsibilities, who does what and who's down to do what in terms of their remit. Keep your policy live, assess and monitor if it's still relevant today or relevant next week. If it needs to be tweaked in terms of current policies or legislations out there, then keep updating your policy. You might probably need to update it even every quarter, but at least it will still be fresh and relevant. These are your 6 helpers or your enablers that will help you to embed sustainability into procurement. So pay attention, take notes if you want. Starting with the governance piece, this is very easy. Don't reinvent the wheel. You already have procurement processes, templates, formats in place. Slot in your sustainability questions into your current procurement templates. If you're doing PQQ or SQ, at that stage, you will ask the supplier 2 questions. 1, give me policy evidence documents for, do you have a policy for modern slavery, anti-bribery, environmental management system, etc. That's part A of your PQQ question. Part B, how have you met these sustainability objectives and KPIs, whatever they may be, for a previous client on a previous project? Give me 2 references. Again, very important. Part A, give me documentary or policy evidence. Part B, tell me how you have met these objectives for a previous project, previous client. Give me 2 references. That gives you a bit of relief, saying, okay, yes, they have the capacity and capability to deliver on sustainability commitments. The second part, most important part, in your tender questions, how will you, Mr. or Mrs. Supplier, meet the commitments for me on this project, on this contract, if you were to be successful? So now you're getting firm commitments from them in the tender stage. Whatever they may be, qualitative, no more than 2 sides of an A4 sheet or 4 sides, whatever you're asking the question. And give me some quantitative commitments if you can gauge some and make some at this stage. Don't forget to write those into the contract. People, you're on this little webinar today. It's not a full-blown workshop, but you're trying to upskill yourself and know a little bit more about sustainable procurement. As you are here today, train the entire procurement team, your commercial management team, whether your end users, your specifiers, your budget holders, but also your supply chain, in terms of what your expectations and your objectives are, especially for your procurement personnel. Where do they fit into the bigger picture of your organization's overall goal of sustainability? What part does procurement have to play in this? And they will be able to understand it better. But think about other tools as well to make sustainable procurement part of people's remit and business as usual. Write it into the job description. But again, like your suppliers, for your staff, don't just slap them in the face with it. Train them on what's expected of them and then write it into the job description. And it does not have to be for a new recruit. You can even do it with your existing staff. Once you tell them, this is what's expected of you, we will provide you training. From now on, you'll have to think about more sustainability in your tenders, in your contracts, in your frameworks, but we will give you training on it. Measurement, ensure you have a tool to measure and monitor the sustainability data. First of all, collect the data from your supply chain. This is not just a nice to have where you spend all of this effort, you've written all of these questions, suppliers answered your bids, you've written into the contract, and then you do nothing with it. You want to make sure that you're meeting your organizational targets, suppliers meeting your contract targets in terms of sustainability. So have a robust measurement and monitoring piece around that as well. Prioritize, you probably do not need to manage your stationary supplier, but if you're buying cables, you're buying pipes, you're buying rebar, cut and bend, you're buying aggregates, think about where is your highest spend, your top 10, your top 20 suppliers, your top 10 risky categories of supply or subcontracting. Those are the ones that you will concentrate on. You will not have the time to spend with every single supplier, every single category of supply. Engage, but start by identifying who are your most important allies, your friends in your sustainable procurement journey. Whose buy-in do you need? I find it's easier to speak to suppliers rather than internal stakeholders because mostly management cares about the money, like have we come within the budget? Are we making a profit? Is sustainability going to cost me a bit more? It's harder to get internal stakeholder buy-in. So identify really early on your internal departments that need to come along with you on the journey. And a grievance mechanism is nothing other than like a complaint form or a whistleblowing policy, but this is not internal, it's external. So giving your supply chain a chance to, write to you and say, talk about anything unethical or unsustainable that's happened in the procurement process or in the tender and after contract management, they can write into you or phone into you anonymously and talk about any concerns they have. That is then dealt with internally. There's a little bit of an investigation process that happens, and then you feed back to the supplier to tell them what's the outcome of the complaint. But in the tender process, whether it's a phone number or an email ID, provide that, signpost your supply chain to the grievance mechanism or your whistleblowing policy, whatever it is called in your organization. The procurement process is plan, source, and manage. No, it's not plan, source, and go down the pub, which used to be the case about 7 years ago, and I'll tell you why. In the planning stage, before you do bullet point or tick point number 4, which is writing your strategy, challenge the need. Your end users, your specifiers will always come to you with something that's urgent. Everything is always urgent. I think as procurement professionals, we react to things that were needed in 1842. They'll tell you today, I needed it last week, can you buy it today? But that's just our world, isn't it? And if things go wrong, we're always to blame. Challenge the need. Do you need this? Do you need it now? Do you need it in such less quantity? Can we consolidate it? Can we bulk buy? Consortium procurement, thereby gaining economies of scale? Can we get a more sustainable solution? Challenge the need, don't be afraid. If it's urgent, procure it now, challenge it the next time and say, can you get me a spec for a more sustainable solution? Because it's all not down to me to think about it. Do a risk and opportunity exercise. I'm buying something, it's got a lot of plastic packaging, there's a lot of embodied carbon. Can we get apprentices on board? It's got a high value. Think about what your risks and opportunities are. Analyze your market. Yes, we use the same suppliers because they have given us good products and services in the past, but shake up your dormant, sleepy, complacent supply chain. Introduce new products. Look at what else and who else is out there in the market. So a market analysis as well. And all of these needs to then feed into your procurement, your sourcing, your category strategy. Then you come to sourcing, and I already told you about the questions that go into your PQQ or SQ and then your ITT stage. But ensure in your supplier selection and award, you have a very healthy, balanced scorecard, not 100% price or 90% price and 10% quality. Ensure sustainability is given healthy weighting scoring on your balanced scorecard as well. If not, you're basically telling the supplier that I've asked you all the fancy questions as a tick box exercise, and I'll just give sustainability 2% on the balance scorecard. I'm not really serious about it, so you also don't need to really care about it. 8%, 10%, whatever is realistic to you. We're dealing with a lot of public sector clients. The largest score weighting I've seen on the balance scorecard for social value and sustainability has been 44%. That client is really, really serious about it. So think about what it means to your organization. In my procurement world, we would plan, source, and go to the pub because we would hand over the contract to commercial, quantity surveyors, senior quantity surveyors, commercial managers would manage the contract. It is part of their day job. We don't manage the contract. However, we would forget to hand over the sustainability aspects and commitments of the supplier. We would hand over the contract, the scope, and everything's written there. The sustainability aspect, if you don't point it out to your commercial counterpart, is going to get ignored in the performance management of the supplier. So very, very important. Buyers on the call, when you're handing over from procurement to whoever it is in your world that manages the contract, hand over the sustainability commitments, point it out in the contract to say, you need to manage this aspect as well, not just the technical scope, come within the budget, delivered on time, delivered in the correct place, etc. Suppliers made these commitments, have written it in, ensure you hold them to those commitments as well. And the contract reviews, I'm not sure how it happens in your world. In my world, it's always been every quarter. Again, in the contract management, contract review, sustainability needs to be included in there as well. Otherwise, it's just going to get ignored. Considering the needs, your impacts, and what's happening in the market, the question over here, how many tiers of supply chain needs to be, can be influenced, and do we need to do so? As far down as possible that you can go, ask your tier ones, have you first of all sublet any element of the work out? If yes, tell me which element. which part of the scope and what value. You need to know that because those are the risks that can come to you via your supply chain. If there are any ultimate client requirements over and above your own organizational sustainability requirements, don't forget to pass that down to your supply chain as well. Any other external stakeholder expectations, if you've got NGOs as well that are putting pressure on you to have a bit more innovative and sustainable solutions, that is something that your organization has taken on board. Don't forget to include those as well in your tender. But first of all, think how much influence and leverage you can actually have in the marketplace and with your supply chain. When planning, consider things like total cost of ownership, not just the immediate purchase price. Probe the need, probe, challenge the need. Can you do with none of it at all? Can you do with less? Can you think of something more sustainable? Think about your sustainability impacts, social, economic, environmental. Use early market engagement where possible. This will not be possible for every category of supply, but especially for your big buys, your top 10 spend. Sit down and have an open 360 discussion with your supplier. You will be pleasantly surprised. The supply chain, I believe, are way ahead than us on that sustainability journey. They have innovated, they have digitized, they have got those sustainable solutions. It's just a matter of you and me asking of them. Engage with your internal stakeholders as well to understand your current demands, past, future, and to generate sustainability ideas, especially with your technical scope writers. They need to think about it as well. Understand how your supply chain perceives you. Are you a lucrative client? Are you just nuisance value? You're giving them orders worth 10K, 20K, and asking them for 100 apprentices on board, for example. Think about your place in the supply chain and in the market as well. Horizon scanning for any current public procurement notices, any government notices or any legislation that might affect you that needs to be fed into your procurement process, for example. Include competition amongst your supply chain. Like I said, wake up your dormant, sleepy suppliers, introduce new products, new suppliers from the market, and think about transparency. This is very, very important as part of sustainability in your supply chain. Be transparent about the procurement decisions you make, unprejudiced, unbiased decisions, and encourage transparency in your tier ones and beyond as well. Whole life costing, so just a bit of graphs and diagrams on the screen. Like I said, don't just think about your purchase price, but the acquisition, so it being transported to you, mobilization, demobilization, spare parts, for example, maintenance, over and above that. What is it going to cost over the ownership, but the whole life cycle of that asset, whatever that may be that you are procuring? So don't just be blindsided to that little box there in the corner. When you're writing sustainability aspects into your specification, again, connect to the golden thread. So whatever is your organizational level goal, it feeds down into procurement and out to your supply chain. So connect to that golden thread from your organizational level policy and strategy. So if the organizational policy is talking about 90% of waste must be diverted from landfill, that needs to feed into procurement and your tenders as well. Can what you're asking of the supply be delivered by your large companies and SMEs as well? If the answer is no, just take that question and tweak it, water it down a little bit for your SMEs so that you're not cutting out the competition from your diverse supply chain. That's the last thing you want to be doing in the process. Make sure whatever you're including or asking of the supply chain is appropriate to that risk and opportunity and scope to leverage. No woolly, fluffy, how will you bring about world peace or heal the ozone layer kind of questions. That's unrealistic. Sustainability does not cost you more. It will only cost you a little bit more if it's a brand spanking new solution in the market. I always tell all of my participants on my webinars and workshops, in your bill of quantity, whatever is your pricing document, we mostly use Excel, include another tab where they can price for alternative solutions in case, like I said, it's a brand new solution in the market. So do allow them to cost for that and keep that option in. If there are any responsible sourcing standards, any eco labels, for example, BES 6001 for rebar or aggregates, any eco labels like Red Tractor or recycled cotton, for example, whichever industry you come from, if there are already recognized and established standards and eco labels for whatever it is you're procuring, put them into your spec as well so supplier knows what is expected of them. Pass on any ultimate stakeholder client requirements, and think about any minimum levels of performance that may be required for any product that you're procuring to. These are just some examples of product labels. Fair trade is something we're all aware of. We see it in the supermarket. People from the fashion industry, clothing industry, BCI, Better Cotton Initiative is something that is applicable, as is organic cotton. Think about carbon trust, carbon footprint, recyclability, for example, FSC, PEFC for timber. So if you're buying products which there are recognized, established eco-labels, you can put that in your spec. Pre-qualification and ITT, like I told you, and I've given you the example earlier. In your PQQ, also known as SQ in public procurement, it's testing the track record of the supplier, your capacity and capability to deliver on sustainability requirements, just your capacity and capability, your policies and how you have done it on previous projects and with previous clients. Your invitation to tender, your bids is actually testing, can they make some commitments? How are they going to do it for you if they are successful on this project for your organization on this contract? So you're requesting contractually binding targets from them against maybe some baselines that you may be setting for them already. So know the distinction, but ask some bold but very, very smart questions in both stages of your sourcing. And don't forget to manage the contract. Don't expect your supply chain to deliver automatically on sustainability commitments. They will deliver the contract scope, the technical scope and spec. If you don't manage the contract and talk about sustainability, it's going to go out of the window. All your efforts are basically gone to waste. You need to hold your tenderers to the commitments they have made in those glossy bid documents that they always keep sending us. Collect and analyze the data. So you've asked something of them, you have set targets for them. Why won't you collect the data? So collect the data and analyze how the supply chain is doing. Are they performing well? Is it bad? Is it good, bad, ugly? What can we do to mitigate if there are any barriers in terms of sustainability performance? Score them, whether it's mostly we do a score of 1, 2, 3, good, excellent, fair, but don't keep it vague. Tell them what it means. What does bad performance mean? Put some bullet points against, you have not met the targets, you're falling below, the goals, or good is you're meeting the targets, excellent is basically you're smashing it out the park, giving us a VFM, value for money, added value, something as simple as that. Penalties is not really my favorite word. Try to incentivize your supply chain to deliver on your sustainability KPIs. It could be anything from bonuses, it could be monetary incentivization, promise of future business, promise that they will be included on the next tender list. But if they are doing really well, you can just reward them in terms of a certificate of appreciation, saying in the last 3 quarters, you smashed the targets out the park in terms of sustainability. Here's a certificate of appreciation from our organization to you to say you've done really, really well on your KPIs in the last 2 or 3 quarters, whatever that may look like. But when you manage the contract, ensure it's a 360, a two-way dialogue, especially for your strategic partners, your top 20 spend. You're trying to have this collaborative discussion rather than dictating to them that thou shalt do this. Most often I find we are the barriers for the supply chain performing well, if not performing at all. And an example I'll give you is of a groundworks clearance supplier where they had to take out quite a bit of grass and Japanese knotweed. Now we kept blaming the supplier saying, you haven't even started the work on site, you're always late. But the reality of that is we didn't even give them access to site. So how can I blame you for being late, not coming to site to do the work when I've not even given you access? So we were the barriers to the supplier performing at all. So think about having the open discussion. If you are reviewing your supplier's performance, let them review yours as well. You might just find that, you've got some barriers, you can mitigate them, but have this open discussions and have a very, very strong collaborative professional relationship with your supplier. After all of this has happened, think about what worked well, what didn't go so well. For things that didn't go really well, maybe just capture lessons learned. It does not need to be a massive document unless something has gone terribly wrong, then it's an investigation, which is, I don't wish that on my worst enemy. Lessons learned, what we procured, what worked well, what didn't go well, what can be done better next time. Share lessons learned internally with the whole procurement team, supply chain management team, your contract managers as well. For things that went well, just make a 1-page good news case studies. We procured this scope, this value, this supplier. This was what was expected of them. This is what they did going over and above that. Again, like lessons learned, share your good news case studies internally as well, so that the next person in your team that buys the same or similar material or service, they're aware of what the market is capable of doing for you. Right, I've come to the end of it. So what I'm going to do is, if all of you on this webinar, if you go to Google and just type in www.menti.com and type in a code 97157160. I have a little bit of a quiz for you. Surprise exam past Halloween. So www.menti.com and the code is 97157160. I have a little quiz for you and hopefully it works. Oh, there's lots of you on the screen already. So I'm just going to start the quiz. I can see James Bond and everything on there. Quite a lot of interesting logos, right? So I'm just going to start my quiz. The international standard for sustainable procurement is called ISO 20400. Is it 14001, 18001, or 9001? It is 2400. The ISO 2400 as a standard only applies to large organizations. This is true or false? It's false. So it applies to organizations irrespective of your size, your sector, or your geographical location. Question 3. Procurement objectives and goals for sustainability should be aligned with organizational goals top to bottom, developed only by the procurement team because you know the suppliers best, focused only on cost savings, and the last thing you should consider in the procurement process. It should be aligned with your organizational goals from top to bottom. You do not need to have a mouse or mice eating up your golden thread. So that's quite an important one there. And the last question. When should you engage the supply chain about sustainability? Is it before you go to tender, throughout the tendering process, so ITT RFP, just at the time of signing the contract, or all of these answers is correct? All of these. So it's a myth that after contract award or even after a framework has been let, you've not yet had your mini competitions, that you cannot speak to the supply chain. You can always speak to your supply chain, and this is true also of public procurement. We have checked this with legal teams quite often, time and time again. It's never too late or never too early to speak to the supply chain. As long as you speak to them and you do it collaboratively, you're not suddenly introducing, boo, surprise, it's Halloween, here's some sustainability clauses, now you go and deliver what I'm asking of you. Having those early conversations will cost you less. Yes, it might just cost you a little bit more later because, of course, your supplier also needs time and money resources to deliver what you're asking of them additionally quite late in the process. Keep it as early as possible, but you can always speak to them. In your day job, we speak to suppliers throughout the day, week, month, year, and decade. So we're always forward-facing with external stakeholders who are the suppliers. So there's no wrong answer there. And Claire, whoever you are, well done. You are the leader today. So, right, let me just go back to my slide deck. Quick summary of what we did today. We started by defining sustainability as being a triple bottom line or the three spheres. I always say this, if you forget one or two of the others, your sustainable decisions are going to fall flat and become very, very unsustainable. Not all three spheres will be applicable to every works package or category of supply. You will have it to a greater or lesser degree, but don't ignore the three spheres. Connect to the golden thread: procurement team, department, policies, templates, formats. Connect to your organizational level goal. Don't divorce yourself from what your leadership message has been given from your leadership. Sustainable procurement is basically smart procurement. Is procurement that has a positive environmental, social, and economic impact. Positive meaning proactive, not leaving it too late. And prioritize your approach in terms of, if your risk is going to occur now, it's going to be disastrous, it's red, do not park it on the back burner. If it's going to be a paper cut, and if it occurs now, I'm fine with it, it's a green, you can actually park that. Think about international frameworks like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's out there, it's publicly available. Most organizations align their organizational level policy and strategy to one or two of those 17 goals. So something for you to explore there as well. What are you going to do? I've got a little bit of homework for you if you so wish after this course. So here are a few resources. You'll have the links to them when you get the slide deck. We've got a not-for-profit organization actually called ISO2400.org. And when you go on there, you can assess your organization. So you've got a few multi-choice questions, and it'll tell you where your organization is currently right now in terms of their sustainability maturity journey. Do it in your lunch break. It's quite a lot of fun. A couple of more e-learning resources. Again, the links at the bottom of the screen on the slide deck. Things that are coming up in terms of, there are white papers from MCOR. You've got a heat mapping. Go and look at the heat mapping. It'll teach you how to do your opportunities and impact assessment. You've got the diagnostic tool as well, so you can look at a measurement and management tool too. If you want to study a lot more, you're a bit nerdy like me, we've got more than 4. Actually, we've got 5 sustainable procurement learning pathways. Each of these pathways has got multiple resources, including workshops and webinars and white papers and web links. So if you want to go on a whole journey, you can go right from level 1 to level 5 or along a pathway and upskill yourself. And finally, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'll take question and answers, and you can fill the feedback form that's in the link. I've got things in the chat, so I'm going to answer the Q&A in here. How does ISO 2400 consider to EcoVadis? I'm not too familiar with EcoVadis, but this came up on a workshop last week with me. Sarah, do you want to type in a little more detail so I can answer your question completely? Sarah, over to you to type in about EcoVadis. Okay, how can you educate your organization better on the benefits of social return on investment? Anonymous attendee, it's quite a hard one because the benefits, for them, it's all about the monetary benefits. Like I say, if you do not have leadership support from the top, do things backwards, upside down, inside out. Explore talking to your external stakeholders, which is your supply chain first, to ask them that I procured this from you time and time again. If you give me an alternative sustainable solution, what's the cost savings in that? And that's how you build your social return on investment mini case study to start with. It's really, really hard to educate your organization right off without them seeing some tangible cost saving benefits. So start upside down, get those cost saving kind of case studies from your supply chain, and that will be a bit more helpful. How do you influence your services to forfeit some of the price quality? Good. How do you influence your organization, I would say, to forfeit some of the price quality part of your, your scoring card, your evaluation, for more on social value evaluation? Ruth, but it starts with what the organization wants to do. If the message is not coming from the top, I speak to a lot of local government organizations, both in Ireland and Wales, and they tell me shocking things like, Mel, I don't think I can go beyond 2% or 5% on my balanced scorecard. And I said, then stop and think, go back at least 5 steps and think about your drivers. What is driving you to be sustainable as an organization? Why did you even come to one of my workshops? You're talking about upskilling yourself, and you're asking me to design all of these tender questions to go into your tenders, but you don't really want to evaluate it, not even give it 2 or 5%. So start at what's driving you. And You do not have to wait for something disastrous to happen to your organization for you to then realize, oh my God, I need to give sustainability a higher weighting. But think about things like, okay, net zero, for example, 2050 or 2030 is our target. So can we give it a heavier weighting? So think about what your organizational goals are and tie in your evaluation to actually sit in line with those goals. Do you have, so Jake, do you have any thoughts on how to assess requirements and establish how much social value could be realistically achieved? Jake, I would think in my case, so working on large infrastructure projects, we put about 20% in the balanced scorecard for social value. We started out with 10, but then the client dictated that at least 8 of that 10% needs to be purely for decarbonization. So we increased overall social value and sustainability scoring to about 20%. I would say realistically start with at least 10 for it actually to make a bit of a difference in your bids. Again, anonymous attendee. Whenever I raise a sustainability solution, the immediate strong backlash I receive is regarding cost. I am not surprised. What can I do for my business to address this? And I'll tell you the same thing that I said earlier. Do it back to front, do it upside down. Go to your supplier and say, if you give me a more sustainable solution, what will be the cost reduction? And take that and then convince your organization to say, hey, it's sustainable, but guess what? It's also cost friendly. So can we then now buy the more environmentally or economically sustainable solution? So try to do it that way. Ruth, again, in your experience, in my experience, who looks after monitoring your sustainability commitments made in the tenders? Ruth, so I come from a very different world. So having worked in very, very large projects, we had a separate social value sustainability delivery team. So they would formulate the questions to go into the PQQ and tenders. And when those responses came back, whether it was equality, diversity, skills, education, employment, environmental aspects, or community engagement, we had managers who were experts in that field, and they would evaluate those tender questions. You and me, Ruth, we are procurement professionals. I think you're a procurement professional. That's part of our day job. I know everything about NEC contracts and procurement. I know a little bit about the sustainability aspects, but I'm not a subject matter expert in the impacts and opportunities. I can speak about it, yes, as an expert, but I do not know about every single one in a lot of detail. Sarah, how do I go about developing a sustainable procurement policy? Yes, I have, Sarah, I'll give you some right now on the call. Go to Google and type in Grosvenor Sustainable Procurement Policy, GROSVENOR. Grosvenor, the property development business. Grosvenor has a 21-page supply chain charter. That's quite a robust policy. So Grosvenor and Skanska, SKANSKA, Skanska Sustainable Procurement Policy. So Grosvenor and Skanska, both publicly available. Find it on Google, and probably you can pinch with pride something from there to develop your own sustainable procurement policies. How do you develop it? Probably things like, look at your drivers, Sarah, because the drivers need to shape your sustainable procurement policy, position procurement as front and center as a catalyst for change. There are anonymous attendee, no, there are no audits for 2400. There are assessments. We do assessments as an organization, and we tell you how well you are doing on a score of 0 to 5, 0 obviously being poor, 5 is obviously doing really, really well. How does that work? You approach us as a business, Action Sustainability, and tell us whether you want a full assessment, you want a gap analysis. The cost is totally different. We approach you, we give you a proposal, and we look at your documents, interview your people. I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to answer the few questions that are still in here. Is that all? 1 second. Which clients are leading the sustainability charge, public or private? Jesus Christ, that's a tricky one. My public sector clients think that sustainability is a waste of time. Why do we collaborate with our suppliers? They should just get on and do what we ask of them. I've seen balanced scorecards that are 100% price, to which the supplier says, Mel, I do not even wish to bid on this tender. The client is wasting my time. I would say private, we deal also with large global clients who think that sustainability is a woke issue, but half of the management wants to come on board, the rest don't really care about it. So I think the public sector is still a bit behind, but also depends upon the geographical location. I've seen the Middle East The Middle East, I think, is way ahead of where the UK is as a country, and that was quite a pleasant surprise for me. So it's quite a mixed bag in there. Any other questions? Ruth, no, Sarah, you had something about EcoVadis. I'm just conscious that I haven't answered that. If you could give me some more detail, or if there's no other questions, I am going to finish the session for today. Just go to the chat function and there is a feedback form. Click on it. It's just 4 or 5 multiple choice, and you can say how well the session has gone or not. The next year, January onwards, we're going to have social value as a bolt-on to the Sustainable Procurement webinar. I don't know if my colleague Vaishali is on the session today. Vaishali, if you're here, just drop me a capital V in the chat or the QA function. Vaishali Baid is recently recruited social value expert in-house in our business, and she will help me develop that webinar as well. Again, go to the feedback form. I'm going to say thank you if there are no other questions, but hopefully we've met your expectation today. So I am going to say goodbye for now. Thank you.